Morning. My name is Boris Logvinskiy, and I am the head of product at MoPub. And as the slide just suggested, we're going to talk about the next phase of in-app monetization for mobile apps. So I think much like monetization in general that started in desktop, this topic that we're going to talk about started in desktop as well, and that's header bidding. So I think there's no monetization trend, no sort of technology that has really captivated and taken control of sort of when you think about the desktop monetization space and what everyone's been talking about for the last couple of years, like header bidding. And the results sort of speak for themselves. Over 70% of desktop developers have tried header bidding inside of their websites, and they've seen really strong results. They've seen 30 to 40% increase in CPMs and really, really strong revenue. So it's no surprise that that trend is now making its way to in-app. And so the conversation around bidding and what does that mean for the in-app environment, which is inherently so much more different than the desktop environment, is continuing and really starting. So I want to spend some time today talking to you about what we think needs to be true in order for this to work. And in order for all of you as app developers and the whole ecosystem to be successful with this trend in app. Before we jump into that, though, I want to quickly discuss the state of monetization today and how header bidding makes it better. So the state of monetization today is pretty straightforward. Most of you know this, especially most of you who work with lots of different ad monetization partners. When you think about your basic setup inside of your own homegrown mediation system or a third party that you use, what's used to order all the different demand sources is generally historical prices, right? So this is your traditional waterfall where the demand source that pays you the most is at the top, the one that pays you the least is at the bottom. The disadvantage of this approach is that it is based on this historical average. And the average is not a true reflection of the value of a particular user at a particular point in time. So while the average can be $5 for a particular user, a demand source might be willing to pay $100. And for a different user, they might be willing to pay 10 cents. But all you're seeing is that $5. And as a result, as a publisher, you're now taking advantage of sort of the competition in a really, really robust way. And the advertisers on the other side are also not able to reach their audience, especially the audience that they're willing to pay really, really high values for. But this is the inherent problem of the traditional waterfall, right? And this has been the mainstay in in-app monetization for quite some time. And I think this is where bidding has a really great opportunity to change the conversation. Change the conversation from a historical waterfall to one where in real time we're getting prices from across many different demand sources and are able to create true competition. So think of a world where instead of putting in a historical price of $5, we know that a particular demand source actually values this particular user at $5. Allows you to create and foster real competition, to get real pricing, and get a true value of what that user is, of the true value of the user at that moment in time. And so that's what header bidding has done in desktop. It's created this unified auction and has allowed the competition to sort of increase, and that's what's driven the increase in revenue and CPMs for publishers in that space. That said, we shouldn't be talking about header bidding in the same way that we talked about in desktop. For the sort of basic reason that there's no header in an application, so like the name just doesn't make sense. But really, we should be thinking about it totally differently. We should be thinking about it from the ground up. The history of header bidding in desktop was that in order to foster more fair competition inside of DFP, which was traditionally skewed towards Google, demand sources and publishers created this hack, this way to create tons and tons of line items, to create all kinds of really intricate setups to create this sort of almost fake competition because there was no robust way to do that. In app, we have a really great opportunity. We have an opportunity to build this from the ground up and do it right. And so at MoPub, we're calling it advanced bidding. Other folks are calling it in-app bidding. Whatever the name is, the core tenet here has to be that it has to be different from desktop. It cannot be just a replication of exactly what we saw there because the in-app environment is really unique. And so we believe there are three things that have to be true about any advanced bidding or in-app bidding solution. The first is that it needs to be fully supported by the publisher's ad server or the mediation platform. And what we mean by this is that it shouldn't be a facilitation of this hack. It shouldn't be a facilitation of what we saw with DFP or what we see with sort of other vendors across the industry where you're hacking the ad server, creating tons and tons of entries and line items, in order to make this work. It should be a fully supported system that supports a real-time bid directly from the demand partners that want to participate in this into the ad server or to the mediation system or the homegrown system, whatever it is, that allows for a real-time evaluation of the value of the user. And that's going to be super critical because, especially for app developers, it simplifies the setup and it simplifies the overhead that they have to put in and the time they have to spend in managing their day-to-day operations. The second thing that has to be true is that we have to have ad networks participate in this. Ad networks make up a huge amount of revenue and a huge portion of revenue, especially in the gaming space where rewarded video is such a popular format. And it's super critical that ad networks come along with this and start to think about this and integrate into these systems and really think about the real-time bidding, the in-app bidding portion of this. Because without them, we're just going to be sort of operating in this very mixed world with very mixed results. And the last thing that has to be true is that we have to allow demand sources to preserve their ad format innovation. And what I mean by this is that the operating systems, iOS, Android, have created this amazing canvas on which we've all been able to build really, really great apps, right? We're talking about AR, we're talking about VR, we're talking about using accelerometers and creating really, really unique and robust experiences. And the app developers and game developers in this room have done that. And so we want to make sure that on the monetization side, the ads vendors are able to do the same thing, that we're able to create these unique experiences that keep up with the experiences that are created in the app and the game itself, and allow the demand sources to create experiences like native ads, like rewarded video that really fit with the overall game experience, or the overall app experience, and that are not just sort of a banner plastered at the bottom of the app. Though, don't want to hate on banners too much. I know they're popular. I know they make folks lots of money. But we think there's a better world out there, and so in order for that to be true, whatever this bidding system, advanced bidding, in-app bidding solution, needs to ensure that it facilitates this. It needs to ensure that it facilitates the ability for the demand source to continue to innovate and create unique ad experiences. And so it's these three things that we at MoPub believe have to be true. You have to have full support from the ad server or for the mediation system to take in those prices in real time. You have to allow networks to participate, and they have to be brought along. And then you also have to ensure that when they do participate, they can take advantage of the technology that they've built in order to render ads within the app in a sort of unique way, in the way that they think is best for the end user. But rather than sort of me continuing to talk about this and sort of discuss the benefits of this, what I want to do is I want to bring up Adam, who's the Senior Director of Ad Monetization at Sega. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about his experiences with bidding in his past life and how Sega is thinking about monetizing in the future. So Adam, come on up.
I would be quite happy for you to carry on talking.
Adam, welcome.
Hello.
So perhaps we could start off with you telling us just a little bit about yourself, what you do at Sega.
Sure. So I've been in the ad ops business for almost 2 decades, way too long. But I'm actually relatively new to the in-app space. And so I run the ad monetization team at Sega. There's 4 of us. It'll be a good thing for Daniel back in SF to know that the plan isn't to create hundreds of line items at 5-cent increments, because that would be kind of a nightmare, especially as we have about 20 different titles right now, and we'll probably go up from there. So we really don't want to be creating that many line items. And one of the weird things when I joined Sega, on the very first day, two things occurred to me. Mike Evans, my boss, CMO over at Sega of America. The first thing was, he's like, we got to figure out header bidding. You know, we've got to figure out programmatic. So I'm putting that on your deck right away, you know, first morning. And the second thing was, we had a strategy meeting, and he asked Byron, I think, who's in the room here, he's like, so who's in the first position and what's the CPM? And I was like, what? Because coming from desktop and not really being an app, it's like, wait, did I just time travel back to 2010? What happened? So this is the need for this should be beyond obvious for everyone. But how we get there is a very different question.
Cool. Yeah, I think it's true, and I think it's great that you guys are already thinking about this. So you saw this happen in desktop. You saw the evolution of bidding and desktop. What was that experience like? What were some of the learnings that you can take away from that and share for us as we think about this for Inapp?
Yeah, you know, we had a very deep. So I worked at a company, Wikia, which is a commercial version of Wikipedia, millions and millions of pages, and we had a very deep relationship with Rubicon Project. I don't know if you followed their stock price in the last couple of years, but I can tell you in my portfolio it's gone down quite a lot. And the fact is that they weren't on top of this. The whole header bidding sort of took everyone by storm. And it was amazing to watch how rapidly people adopted that. And new players, people like AppNexus and Index Exchange, which used to be called Casali, and if anyone remembers Casali, they are usually remembered for having the red bags at AdTech and nothing else. But they've reinvented themselves through being header bidders. Quite amazing. And then these giants, these 800-pound gorillas in the room, Rubicon, sort of like dropped the ball, and they're having to fight their way back. So one thing was, in the change in desktop, we had winners and we had losers. The other thing is, we actually came to it fairly late because of that relationship with Rubicon, and we were doing very well and sort of doubling, tripling our revenue through just using Rubicon as an SSP. We didn't see the 30 to 40% growth. We saw, you know, let's say in the more 20% sort of range. And it's
still pretty good.
Yeah, no, excellent.
I think everyone would take that.
Yeah, I think everyone would take that. One of the key things isn't just the efficiency of getting because this is the oldest question in advertising. How do I get the right ad to the right person at the right time? And header bidding or advanced bidding should get us closer to that, right? The waterfall keeps us away from that, because if the right bidder is they're on the third ad impression, and they would recognize me, say, as an automotive intender, and they would be willing to pay $40 CPMs for that, they're never going to get it, because they're being disintermediated by the mediation stack. So what we saw on the desktop side was we saw new demand sources coming in, and then sort of bid density that really drove up the CPM, and that was the key. The key was being able to have all of these people bid against each other.
Cool. That's a really, really good insight. So now as we think about this transition into Inapp, and you're sort of reliving this a second time, it's like Groundhog Day, but hopefully a little less messy. Kind of like what makes you excited about this for the Inapp ecosystem?
Yeah, well, I mean, we have to get away from the waterfall. It's funny. So for the last 6 months that I've been at Sega, I've been talking to a lot of other publishers. Not all the results in experiments with header bidding have been that great for them. You know, without naming names, one guy we talked to, had sort of like turned on just a couple of sources, a couple of large names that most people would recognize here in the network world, and header bidding, and we're like, well, what were the results? Did you see a 20% lift in revenue? He's like, not so much. It really didn't move the needle. So not all header bidding or advanced bidding solutions are created equal, right? There's so much fragmentation in our space already. It's really important, I think, to have a cohesive strategic approach. Without boosting MoPub too much, I think you guys are one of the ones who are really thinking about this comprehensively at the DNA level. I think Interactive is as well. But there are some other well-known providers out there who seem to be sort of wanting to take that header bidding concept, basically bolting it on top. In my experience, that hasn't worked as well. We need, we need the bidders to talk to the rest of the stack. We need to make sure like latency isn't an issue. We definitely saw that at Wikia. We started off with 3 to 5, by the time I left, 3 to 5 different demand sources. They have about 10 now. I was at an Ad Monsters in Austin, and the winner of the most bidders in the header bidder was one company who had 37. To which we all said, "You're effing nuts. You really should only have 10 max," I mean, and how many of those really? It's the 80-20 rule, right? So yeah, no, I'm excited. We got to get this nailed. This is the only way to extract the real value of a user, because otherwise they're just being disintermediated. I mean, maybe you get lucky and that first demand partner because based on how much they were paying you yesterday or last week is the right one and has the right advertiser, but maybe they're not.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's the right approach, and that's kind of like what I was getting at with sort of that first point, that it needs to be really thought sort of top to bottom, needs to be thought about and supported by the core platform, right? So that it's not this bolt-on, so it's not this like crazy system that makes a publisher go insane trying to figure out this 5-cent increment or 10-cent increment or whatever the cent increment is, and some poor person is like stuck creating all those line items. It's quite painful.
His name's Daniel.
Yeah. Sorry, Daniel.
He's not here. It's okay. You can talk about
him. Cool. So, you have clearly a bunch of experience of this. How are you thinking about this at Sega? Like, how are you guys thinking about moving into this world, and what are the things that you're looking for in order to make the jump?
Yeah, so again, from day one, we started interviewing people about their experiences. It's clear that the promise is more than the product that's actually out there right now. I don't know if anyone's actively doing this. Obviously, Amazon TAM, right, the Transparent Ad Marketplace, they were one of the first people we talked to. We did run into issues there. We have a lot of COPA traffic, and frankly, they aren't supporting that right now. Maybe they'll change if they hear enough people say, hey, do you support a COPA ad stack? But today they don't. They're not really interested in those people because they don't have credit cards and they won't buy from A9 and on Amazon. So that was the first hurdle that we hit. And we saw some other providers that were very much bolt-on or do-it-yourself, which is on desktop how it started. There was like, oh, get a free, get the pre-bid JS, stick it on your page, and hack it together. We don't want to hack it. We want to make sure the customer support we get from whoever we are working with is good. We want to make sure the latency is good. We want to take work off our developers, not put more on. We are stuck, I think, with SDKs right now, which I wish we weren't. We experience some. I'm sure a lot of people here, we call it SDK fatigue. Our developers really, we have sort of 5 to 10 SDKs in any one game. And I would love to see more server-to-server connections. I think those will come eventually. It's a chicken and egg situation. You need to make sure that the demand partners, they have to be set up to do this. The other thing that I'm looking for is really mobile-first providers. So I don't want someone who's, it's so funny how many times we have people come into Sega and they start pitching us about a solution that would work great on desktop with mobile web, but they haven't really thought about it in real terms for the in-app space. So whoever we adopt for advanced bidding or header bidding or whatever we end up calling it, I want to make sure that they are really part of this community, part of the in-app space, and understand it, and understand the ramifications of any decision they make, because it's just too easy to break stuff, right? And for us, there's a real church and state between our developers and the ad monetization, meaning they really hate us, and even though we make money for the company. And so we are always trying to adopt solutions that will actually make their lives easier, not harder.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's interesting the point you bring up about SDKs, because I think that's probably something that everyone in the room has felt. Every new vendor, every new technology you want to integrate into your app requires an SDK in-app, and I think it is a fine balance, right? It's a fine balance because on the one end, you do want something that's kind of like fast and quick and doesn't require more weight in the app. On the other hand, because it's a mobile in-app environment, you are in this place where you have so much more control than you did in desktop. You have so much more access to data and features to really create those robust experiences that can't be created without an SDK. So it is a really sort of interesting dichotomy that we live in, I think, in the in-app world, where, yes, everybody wants the lighter app, the smaller app, the faster app, because you want to get it distributed. But at the same time, if you want to leverage solutions that take advantage of all the features that are available, you kind of have to do that. And so I think it's a really interesting point you make, and I think the point about the number of partners you work with is really the right one, which is you have to strike the right balance, right? In desktop, you could plug in maybe 30. Maybe it's not advisable, but you could hypothetically do that, and that would come at a cost, but not at a sort of like cost to your app. And when it comes to in-app, you really have to think about the right partners and who you're going to work with, because it's sort of a much more, it's a much more heavyweight. It's a much more, I don't know why to say the word permanent, but it's sort of a much more, it's a bigger portion of the decision because it gets embedded in the app directly.
It feels pretty permanent when it takes 3 weeks to get something changed or update, old SDKs and games, smaller games that really, they should be updated, but they're actually using a version that's, 9 months old because we just, don't have the dev sources to get around to it. It's just not worth it. But I will take the trade-off from the performance of the ads that we see through SDK serving. I don't know if people in this room are involved in advertising in-app and haven't worked in desktop, the KPIs on the ad products that we run blow desktop and mobile web away. I can't wait to explain to brand advertisers about rewarded video if they don't understand just how the video complete rates and the click-throughs and the viewability just trounce desktop. Which is why I'm in this space. You've got to skate, an old boss of mine used to say, you skate to where the hockey puck is going to be. And I think this is where all the ad spend is coming. And and part of solving this problem is going to be solving advanced bidding.
Cool. So maybe I'll ask one last question, which is, you guys have certainly talked through, it sounds like you've talked to a number of platforms. Do you have any advice to the publishers in the room? Just in general, when you're picking out vendors, when you're talking about whether it's bidding or something else, what are the things to watch out for? What are some good questions to ask based on sort of the experience that you guys have had at Sega?
We've covered some of this, but let's review. I would say adopt a mobile-first sort of provider, someone who really understands the in-app space, someone who can support all of the formats that you have, someone who has an active relationship with various demand sources, and make sure that you don't want to adopt a solution where there is one person bidding for your inventory. Yay, guess what? It's Facebook. They won it again. You need to make sure that it's a robust solution. Make sure the customer service is there. Honestly, we do not have the resources, despite being Sega, to when our business is creating great games and games with Sonic. It's not necessarily, our entire business isn't pivoted towards maintaining an ad monetization engine. So we really need hand-holding with that. So I would look for that, and beware of fake promises and people who say it's easy, and people who just want to sort of hack it together for you. It likely won't work long term.
Cool. You're talking about header bidding like it needs to be built for the first time. And being in the ad space, there's a lot of people telling me that header bidding and real-time bidding is available, and I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of separate. It is sort of a nuanced conversation, nuanced point. I think it's important to separate kind of the two parts of the system. So certainly exchanges have been around for a really, really long time. So MoPub, for example, runs an exchange that happens in real time. So the DSPs that are connected to us are bidding in real time for every single impression and valuing it that way. However, exchanges are just a portion of the whole ecosystem when it comes to in-app monetization. Networks make up a really, really big chunk of that. And networks traditionally have not exposed real-time prices into publishers or into ad servers or into mediation platforms. And so I think that is really the shift that we're seeing, and that's really the shift that's happening in the ecosystem today. It's networks moving into that world, saying, hey, yes, we will bid in real time. We will provide a real-time price. We will do that so that we can sort of compete more effectively because we see the value of being able to get the right users, and we don't want to be stuck down in the waterfall. So I think it's a little bit of both, right? So exchanges have been around for a long time. Real-time bidding within exchanges has been around for a long time. There's a whole part of the ecosystem that has not been doing that externally, and so now that shift is happening. I think that's why we're really having this this particular conversation.
Hey, Adam, you mentioned this a few times regarding latency. I think within desktop, it's kind of
header bidding. It's added another metric that you really need to look at in addition to fill rate and CPM. It's who's providing the least amount of latency. So, for MoPub on the mobile mediation side, what are you guys doing to kind of make sure that there's less latency in this product?
Yeah, so I can't really speak to what others are doing and just tell you a little bit about how we're thinking about it. I think the way we're thinking about it is that there needs to be a mixed solution, a solution that tackles latency in two ways. And so in desktop, because it was hacked together, what happens is you have a ton of these tags that are running on the page itself. You have a bunch of them that go reach out and get prices, and they pass that up to the ad server, and the ad server does the evaluation, right? And that's where the latency comes. It comes from all these tags trying to quickly execute all the prices. The way that we're thinking about it in Inapp is more of a hybrid approach, an approach where we have bidding that's happening more real time, more on the server side, and then the ad rendering is happening on the client side. And by doing it that way, we're really keeping latency low when it comes to that initial, hey, how much are you valuing this? And then the latency that really sort of takes effect is the latency of how long it takes to render the ad, which is a latency that we all kind of have to pay the cost for. I also think that because we end up getting prices in real time, in a traditional waterfall, you're trying many different ad sources until you get one that serves an ad. In this advanced bidding world, you're now getting them bidding only when they actually have an ad. So if everyone, the whole ecosystem moves in this direction, you're actually going to see significantly lower latency all across the board, because once you get that price, you know that that ad's available. You're not doing this kind of repetitive, hey, do you have an ad? No, let me try somebody else piece.
Makes sense, thanks.
Great, thanks again.
Thank you
so much. Big round of applause.